This month on Play Conversations, we're honoured to be joined by an inspiring advocate for children's right to play, Deb Lawrence. Deb is the president of the United States Division of the International Play Association and an associate professor at the Delaware County Community College. With over 40 years in early childhood education, Deb brings a wealth of experience in teaching, program leadership, consulting, and advocacy. Her work spans undergraduate and graduate education, and she's recognised for her deep expertise in operations, leadership, and play-based learning. Deb's voice is one of encouragement and clarity in a sector often clouded by complexity, reminding us why play matters and how we can protect and prioritise it in children's lives. Please enjoy Deb Lawrence.
Kia ora, Deb. Welcome to Play Conversations. It's really lovely to have you here. I'm so excited to have this conversation.
Thanks, Sarah. I am too. And so for those of you who may not know, I'm in the United States on the East Coast. And of course, Sarah's in New Zealand. So I'm thrilled that we've found a time that actually works for both of us.
Yes.
And so a little bit about me. I'm the president of the International Play Association in the United States and have been for about 5 years now. And it is, of course, part of IPA World. And so we're the USA affiliate. I'm also the Screen Free Week coordinator, which I'm hoping we can get New Zealand on board with next year. And then I'm a professor of early childhood education at Delaware County Community College. So I'm old and have been doing this a long time.
Oh, but all that wisdom, Deb. I want to use that in this conversation. So thank you for that introduction. And I'm pleased you want to bring up about Screen Free Week because I do know that there are some people that will be very keen to hear about that.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
So Screen Free Week was originally started by the Campaign for a Commercial-Free Childhood. And because they feel that children are marketed to everywhere. And so then they changed their name to Fair Play, which was still really focused on the impact of screens and gaming, video games. And they have been doing it for the last 10 years. So they submitted an RFP about a year ago now, and IPA USA applied to take over Screen Free Week and were awarded Screen Free Week in October of last year. And so we've been sort of gearing up, as you can say, but the reason why IPA USA went for it is that we feel like screens are replacing play. And so we felt like it was a perfect addition to our mission.
Yeah.
And so it could be a day, it could be a week. I just heard that the Commonwealth of Virginia has adopted it statewide from the governor's office, which is very exciting. And we have many people who participate, but my goal is to get it more embedded worldwide. So that's the other big piece for me.
Yeah. And I guess that sort of represents, hearing your introduction and the long connection you've got, obviously, as a professor of early childhood through to, leading IPA USA and and now Screen Free Week. You've obviously spent a long time advocating for children's rights to play. What do you think started that? What was the bit that lit that for you?
Well, my mother always tells me you've been a leader since you were 8, but my very first official leadership was I was in charge at 12 of the Red Cross volunteers. And so I grew up in South Texas. And so we had hurricanes a lot. And I just will never forget. So we did fundraisers to raise money for the Red Cross. We volunteered in nursing homes or at hospitals. You did a certain number of volunteer hours, like, I mean, hundreds, and you were capped by the Red Cross that you had done all of this stuff. So then I was very interested in that. And then they sent me to Red Cross camp, junior camp, when I was 14. And I became a Red Cross basic first aid instructor at 14. And then, you know, it just went on from there. So all of my friends' parents, when they said, hey, Mom, can I go to blah, blah, blah? They would say, is Deb going? Because if Deb's going, you can go. So my mom always said I was much more mature for my age than my age was. So, and you know, I think because I played all the time,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So but what's so interesting is I grew up on 5 acres out in the middle of nowhere. The nearest house was probably 2 grove fields away. And so I didn't really get to know the neighbors or anybody until I was like 14 or 15 when they wanted me to babysit. So I grew up playing outside all the time, all day long. I never saw my mom at all. She was a stay-at-home mom. Never saw her after breakfast. She said, go out and play. And I went out and played. And at lunch, she put my paper bag lunch on the back porch. If I got thirsty, I would drink out of the hose. And then about 4:30, she'd say, it's time to come in and get cleaned up. And so, yeah, from 8.5 hours, I was outside and played.
Well, and actually, I just have to say, I'm connecting a few dots here because for those that don't know, I met Deb last year in Greenville, South Carolina at the IPA USA conference, which started amazingly. It was so exciting. And then the weather turned.
Oh, boy.
And we had a small hurricane that came through, just small. A little one, which affected the power and the basic services and pretty much everything that a hurricane impacts. But what I was so amazed with, which is now what the point I'm getting to, is that clearly your training in South Texas around hurricanes and tornadoes and things like that, you were so calm, you carried on, just one of those things that happens to everyone every day. And I was just amazed at how you just kept your calm. And now it makes complete sense that you had.
I was in hurricanes all the time. Yeah. Well, and what was so funny, just so you have an idea, when we went on a site visit to Greenville, it's a beautiful town. The people there are amazing.
Yeah.
It's just gorgeous. The very first thing I said is, do you get any hurricanes?
And did they say
that was my very first question. And they said, we've never had a hurricane. And they had not.
Well, that was the mistake right there.
Yes, I should not have asked.
No.
But anyway, so this year, if you want to come, we're not going to have a hurricane because it's later in October, and it's in Kentucky, which is even further away from the Atlantic.
Related, yeah. But no, that makes complete sense now. And actually, we do also have a connection because I was a Red Cross volunteer as well. I have
my goodness.
Mum took us, and I remember being at the rest times. I remember wearing there was a special uniform that we wore, and I was I was amazed. I loved it, absolutely loved it.
I loved it, and it was blue and white. At least in the U.S., it was blue and white. Yeah. And your cap, after you'd done all of your hundreds of hours, was blue and white, and very exciting to get capped.
So there you
And
go.
then after that, I was a volunteer in a nursing home for elderly folks. My dad would drop me off at 8 a.m. He would go to work and then he would pick me up at 4:30. And that's what I did all summer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you went on to do your college years in early years.
Mm-hmm.
What sort of led you to do that? To go from you would have heard
so
sounds like you were going a nursing way, but then what went the early years way?
So I was going the nursing way because I had a childhood injury
Mm.
where I had to learn to walk all over again. And then I had 11 years of plastic surgery 3 times a year because scar tissue does not stretch. And I was just 5 when it happened. And so I thought, oh, well, I want to be a nurse, right? Because I had lots of nursing experience with those nurses. But then I realized when I went to work for a veterinarian, as soon as I graduated from high school, I was the receptionist. And, you know, you need to know everybody's mom and everybody's pet and all of that. And they would call me back to say, can you help? Even though I wasn't the person that was supposed to help in the treatment room, but I went back anyway. And I figured out veins were not my thing. Couldn't do it.
Yeah.
I'd have to look away every single time. I was like, okay, I guess not a nurse. I guess.
No, that's a positive sign.
My goodness. And I hate needles anyway, because I had so
Yeah.
many of them. So, yeah. So no more nursing. No.
Right.
So then it was when in South Texas back then, you were not expected to do well in school. You were just expected to get married and have children. And be a stay-at-home mom, take care of the home, and that was it. And so I was like, I think there's more than that. And so I had to go to school when I got into early care and education, which we did. My first husband was in the Air Force, so we were everywhere, right? And so when we were in Germany, you cannot work in the German economy if you're an American because the jobs are for Germans. And so, I was an officer's wife. And so it was like, okay, what am I going to do? I can't just, I have a 6-month-old and I'm home with him every day, but there has to be something else I could do. And so I volunteered at the thrift store that the officers' wives did. We did all these events, and then I became the bookkeeper. And then because my husband was out in the field all the time, he was always gone. I think for the 3 years we were in Germany, he was home maybe for 9 months total. He would just, he had to go out because it was training. And it was back in the 80s when we were having trouble, like when President Reagan got shot, when the Iran hostages were taken, when there was another big, huge event. And so, the tanks would, when the German wall was still there between East and West, I went through Checkpoint Charlie in the buses. And so, it was a stressful time. And so we were at a port, right? The largest port, Bremerhaven, where all the cars came in and all your goods came in if you were shipping them from the United States. And so, we'd have to go on drills to escape when the tanks would go up toward the borders and then the tanks would come back. And I said, I'm not getting in a car and going to the port. That's the first thing they'll bomb. I'm just going to get in the car and start driving. And come on. And so, we had, and then, the officers' wives would get together, and we were in American housing on Blumenstrasse is where we lived in the German economy. And so, we just went all the moms, we had mom and me programs and all sorts of things. So I get busy.
Yeah.
And did as much leadership as I could. But I had someone who said, well, you seem to like children, so why don't you come volunteer in my kindergarten? I said, oh, I think I'd love that. So 8-month-old, 9-month-old Rod and I went to kindergarten. And I was like, oh, this is so much fun. I really enjoy it. So when we moved back to the States, we had a preschool, and Rod was 3, and now Sean was 1. Sean is the middle child. And I said, well, Rod, I think it's ready for some preschool. And we read all day, and we played all day. We did, all the good stuff. But I thought maybe he was ready for somebody besides his brother to have social interaction with. And so I took him 2 blocks away because we only had one car. I walked 2 blocks away, and I said, I'd like to look at your program. And I talked to them, and I enrolled him there because I really liked the teachers. And he'd been there about 3 weeks when his teacher came up to me. Her name was Tracy. She came up to me and she said, so Rod knows a lot. And I said, oh, good. Well, what did you do to make him know so much? I said, oh, well, we read and we played and we cooked together and we did all sorts of things. She said, so do you want to sub here? That was sort of the beginning.
Yeah.
Because then, oh my God, I had to go back to school, right?
Yeah.
I had to go to school, and I was like, oh, I really like this. And that just turned into a master's degree, which turned into a doctorate. And I'd never go get another doctorate, but boy, I'd go get another master's.
Yeah.
In a heartbeat. It was like my favorite.
Yeah, isn't it interesting? I know when I started my doctorate, I had no clue. I had no clue what was involved. I thought, I'm going to go and do this, which was probably a good thing. But out the other side, you think, I'm never doing that again. And then a few years later, you start thinking, if I did, I'd maybe do that, or I'd maybe, it's just this sort of seed planted around. It's
really hard because you're so into that research piece. Now, toward the end, I didn't even want to read that paper anymore, right? It was, you just get sick of it. But that doesn't mean you're sick of it, everything. And you do need to take a couple of years off because, it's intense.
Yeah.
But, if I went back, I'd get another master's because there's so many things out there, that I go, oh, I'd like to learn more about that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So thinking about your role in the IPA USA, how do you see the landscape of play shifting across the country at the moment? What's exciting you and what's worrying you?
Oh, it's absolutely awful. We still, we do the stupid testing, right? Standardized testing. So April, the month we're in, is awful for children. They have canned curriculums that superintendents spend way too much money on when they should be trusting the teachers. The canned curriculum say there's no integration between subjects, so everything's silo. I can't even tell you how many worksheets every day that children are forced to sit at their desks and do as young as 3. All the way up 3. And I've even seen them in the toddler room, and I had, because I would never be able to be in politics because I can't keep my mouth shut. And so
I don't think that's politicians.
Yeah. Yeah. They would be like, oh my goodness, she can certainly never talk to anybody. Right. So the trend I'm feeling, we might be making some baby steps. They're finally realizing that technology doesn't work, regardless of the grades, because their test scores keep going down. And I keep saying, why in the world are you trying the next program that doesn't have active play in it? And so there are lots of states are taking phones out of schools, which I know is going to concern parents because, we are the capital of school shootings, which is another horrible thing that's happening here. And, I would want my child to have a phone to call me if they needed to, right? but they can give them a flip phone, right? They're not going to be attached to a flip phone like they are a cell phone. And now, you know, there's so much research that's just come out on social media and on gaming and on the increase in anxiety and depression, which leads to suicide rates, that even schools are starting to think, maybe there's another way to do it. And coincidentally, a private school that does pre-K all the way through high school, one of my grad students, because I taught grad school for a long time, one of my grad students called me and said, I have a job for you. And I said, okay, talk to me about it. And she said, we need to restructure pre-K. And I need to get you on with the school administrator. And we need help. And so I think I probably was on the phone call with the school administrator for like an hour and a half with her. And he said, here's what I want you to know. And here's what I'm hearing we need to do different. And I said, and what you're hearing is right. So we just have to figure out how to move more structured, strong academics at 4 into more play-based, child-initiated activities. And I said, and here's some ways you can do that. And he was like, okay, how long is this going to take? I said, you don't just do a one and done. So we have to lay the groundwork. We have to give them some things to try. They have to come up with some things to try once we've laid the groundwork. And then we need to sort of slowly figure out what the successes are and support where they don't feel like they're doing as well, and continue to scaffold this sort of new approach to pre-K. He said, well, what's it going to do to academics? Parents are really, really concerned about, you know, those academics. I said, well, of course they are. Every parent's concerned about their child's success in school. Lots of times because of their own experience. Maybe they weren't as successful, so they're even more motivated to get their child ready. And I said, but the issue is that what you're trying to get them ready for is not what they're yet ready for, which makes them feel like they can't learn anything, that they're stupid, that they don't know. I don't know what that word is. I don't know what that letter is. And you want me to know those things. And so there must be something wrong with me. And so then children lose that confidence, and then school becomes laborious. It's too hard. And then children give up. And so, you know, we have to meet them where they are developmentally, regardless of their chronological age. We have to meet them there. And because we have no idea what they experienced before they walked in. And so every child develops differently. We know that development is interrelated and interdependent. You can't just work on cognition. It's all a big package, right? And so he was like, I like this. And so we'll see what happens. But he was highly motivated to say, we have really good teachers, really devoted, really kind, wonderful teachers. And I don't want them to feel like they've done something wrong. I said, it's not, how can you do something wrong if you don't even know? Right. So it's a way to give them some information and to ask them, based on this information, don't tell them, just say, okay, here's this. So dispositions, right? Positive and negative dispositions. What are you seeing currently in the classroom? What would you like to see more of? How could we get there? And then just they're going to solve the problem. I'm not. So it's their classroom and their kids.
Do you, I know in the States, you know, a lot of your school system is driven by the testing and I suppose the companies behind the testing, and there's the market around not only buying the test, but then having it analyzed, and, you know, so there's big money in there. Do you see that there's ever going to be a time where we're able to move away from that quantitative measure of progress, which is, they're the easy things to measure, you know, reading scores, math scores, those kinds of things, into the very things you're talking about, dispositions, competencies, you know, our skills for life, those critical, creative thinking, you know, which I hope we can never put a number to, because I think that would be horrible to happen, you know, in that way. But do you think you'll see that? That's a big, big machine to shift, isn't it?
So it is a big, big machine shift. And I think with the technology aspect of it, because, you know, everything is done on screens. They take their tests on screens. And so, you know, when we can get them to recognize that taking away recess took away cognition, social, emotional, language, physical development, that then is keeping them unable to sit for long periods of time. So you have more behavior problems, and children feel like they hate school, then they get in trouble, then their parents yell at them, then you give them homework, then you take away recess as a punishment instead of recognizing it's those kids that need the recess the most. I think when we can get them to see the minute things that are contributing, they're big things to me, but those easy to understand things that you have to physically move in order to strengthen those learning connections in your brain. You have to be active and holding it and feeling it and touching it and moving it and manipulating it, even if you're an engineer, right? There's I think it's Stuart Brown that has a YouTube video that talks about the importance of play, and how at MIT, people could not get into MIT just with their test scores. They had to get to one of the criteria was they had to have done something using their hands. They had to have built something. They had to have fixed something. They had to have manipulated something, like working on a car, changing a tire, putting together a piece of machinery. Whatever it was, they had to have done something, or they weren't even, no matter what their test scores were. Because if they couldn't do work with their hands, then they weren't going to be successful. So, you know, some people have figured it out. I think I think we just keep going back to, you know, this is what, 2025. So for 24 years in the US, we focused on standardized tests, and the test scores keep going down. You know, and I have said this to many superintendents and principals. Why are you still on the hamster wheel? It's not working. What are you doing to these kids? You know, we really need to be thinking about what else we could try, instead of continuing on that hamster wheel that is just spinning and spinning and really harming children.
It's interesting that you're saying that, because here in New Zealand, we've got a ministry at the moment that are very pro standard testing. They're looking to the UK, they're looking to the US.
Yeah. Please tell them, look at our test scores.
Well, yeah, unfortunately, it's the ears are closed at the moment, and are not, you know, listening at all to that, and not looking at history. Really, really concerning, particularly when we've got really high rates now and growing of children who identify as neurodiverse. We've got children that are impacted by trauma. We've got a growing divide and constant divide between our Indigenous populations, our Pacifica people, and our non-Indigenous communities. So, you know, that impact of colonisation on outcomes as well. You know, it's huge here, and yet we're returning to what looks to be a very Victorian industrial model of education, which New Zealand has not been known for previously. We've been known as innovative and different and looking outside the box, and it's just heartbreaking at the moment to see that. So I'm pleased that your
but my question would be, what are they reading? Because it's certainly not the research. I mean,
they're not.
They're not. It's, you know, and I think that, you know, who is paying them? What are they getting? Because you know that technology companies went into schools and said, hey, we'll give you all of these computers and Chromebooks and iPads if you'll buy this and this and this, right? So it becomes, it's a capitalism problem from my perspective. Who's making the money here?
Yeah.
And it's always follow the money, right? So what's happening, right? How could you possibly go away for what's been working for centuries and think that this will fix everything when the history is that it is not? And, you know, I mean, Finland is a great example of not doing this.
Yeah, and I don't know why. You know, there's so many references to Finland, and okay, you know, I mean, I spent some time there last year and really, you know, tried to understand why, apart from the sort of systemic organization of their education system, and but also their culture. There's a difference in the culture in terms of trust and autonomy and agency and all of these things that we hold dear. It is just in the fabric of their culture. So I get that, but even if we just look at systems and then translate into our culture, I don't understand why, as a country, certainly New Zealand, we don't look to places like Finland. We seem to continue to follow, you know, the UK, the US, which to me, again,
we can only hope that our current president will keep you from doing that for a while. Please help us, is all we have to say.
It's doing a good job, I think, at the moment. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yikes. And so, you know, if he can alienate every other country, not that we want that as Americans, but if he could, then maybe people will stop looking this way. Because I remember going to OMEP when I was in China. I was in China for 2 summers, working with kindergarten teachers and their directors. And OMEP was there in Shanghai. And I went to OMEP and they were talking about bringing in standardized tests. And I mean, this was back in the 2000s. I think I went in 2013 and 2015. That's when I went. And this was the 2015 trip. And they were standing up saying, you know, we're thinking more. And I stood up in this audience of hundreds of people and said, do not follow the US example. It's not working. It's not working. It's harming children. And you know, you have 300, 400 people from all over the world looking at you like, holy crap.
No, but someone's got to say it, right? And I think that's sort of where I've got to as well, where it's sort of, you know, here in New Zealand, we say bugger it. We're going to just do it, right? We're just going to say it. And
we're going to do what we know what is right for children. And, you know, I work with soon to be teachers, right? So I tell them all the time, you know, what are you going to do when the principal says, here's the curriculum? And what are you going to do when he says, here's the worksheets? And what are you going to do when he says they need to be on iPads 4 hours a day? What are you going to do? And, you know, some of them, I don't want to get in trouble. And I said, then close your door.
Yeah.
You'd rather harm children than get in trouble?
Yeah.
Let's think about it that way.
Yeah. We have a duty of care. And I've talked previously in episodes and I can't believe I continue to have to use this phrase at the moment, but it's educational malpractice. You know, it's the equivalent of being in a doctor's studio, in a surgery, you know, prescribing something that you know isn't right for a person for their health. This is exactly the same. Putting worksheet after worksheet in front of children is not good for their health, not good for their education, and you are not doing your duty of care to that child. And I think that that's something that has to go over and above compliance as a teacher. I know that there are teachers that, you know, this is the difference between paying your mortgage or not, and I totally get that, in which case, as you said, close the door, right?
Close the door.
You know, unless there's cameras in the room, you know, say, nod and say, yes, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, yes, I'm doing this, and then shut the door.
And close it.
Yeah, and carry on. Yeah.
Because your kids are going to be happier, and your kids are going to do better on the stupid test because they've had their hands in it and they've made those learning connections. And it's not just memorizing, which is the lowest form of thinking. You know, remembering on the Bloom Revised Outtree is the lowest form, but that's what we have them do over and over and over again. Then they're able to spit it out the next week, and then after that they forget it because there's something else that replaces that memory, instead of being able to analyze it and evaluate it and create with it. No, we just have them memorize. And so one of the strategies I use with superintendents is the Bloom Outtree. And, you know, I say to them, tell me what you want to see, right? What do you want to see when you walk into a classroom and you're filling out a teacher observation? What do you want? What do you want to see? And they give me this list of, I want to see happy kids. I want to see active kids. I want to see engaged kids. I want to see kids working well together. I want to see, and I said, okay, great. I love it. What are you seeing? And they're like, none of those things. And I said, so how do your teachers know that's what you want to see? How are you communicating that that's what you want to see? And then they do this. And I said, well, it comes from the top.
Yeah, exactly. And I know, so here in New Zealand, our delightful new government brought in requirement that we must have 1 hour of literacy and numeracy every day. So 1 hour reading, 1 hour writing, 1 hour maths. And that's fine. In the policy, wording says on average, right? So when you look at the wording of the policy, you know, we had this big campaign that came out, and they were campaigning on being really hard because it almost felt like they said, well, teachers hadn't thought about this up till now, but we're going to bring it in, right? and we're going to make it happen. And so when they released the wording of the policy, I know myself and other colleagues, we looked at it and we said, well, we're doing that now, right? It's on average. And that
on average.
And it, you know, an understanding that it may be integrated with other things. So the actual policy
is not bad.
It is the interpretation of that policy into practice and the sort of multiple whispers down the line to that classroom practitioner who says, I have to, you know, start the clock. I've got to now, my hour starts now, and then I'm going to clock off in an hour. And that's not what the policy says. And I think we have to, you know, like you say, it starts from the top. Let's look at this and communicate this better because it's impacting our kids and best practice in the classroom.
Well, and how many times can you do? I mean, even when I was teaching pre-K and kindergarten, we did at least an hour, not at one time, right? So, because it was all integrated. Like if we were working on something with social studies, I'd say, oh my goodness, somebody go get me that book on maps. And so then we read about the books on maps. And I said, if you create your very own map, what would that map look like? And what would you want it to say? And then we had writing. And, you know, and so you had social studies, literacy, and writing all in there. And then, you know, we have some study that we're doing. And so there's lots of books in the classroom about the study. And So, you know, I would always tell the kids, if you want me to read a book, go put it where we have morning meeting or circle, whichever one, whatever grade it was. And, you know, I'd have a stack of books like this. And fortunately, I had parent volunteers who could still come in. And so parents were coming in and they would say, you know, do you want me to wipe the tables? I said, no, I want you to go sit in the book area and read some books. And so, okay, really, you don't? I typically have to clean. I said, go over in the book, pile of books there. Say to the children, I'm getting ready to read this book if anybody wants to come, and then read the book. And you know, and so there was so much literacy. What's this book about? We write it down.
But we know there's literacy in play. There's ethics in play. You know, this is assuming we're going to extract it out and formally teach it, because it's not happening otherwise. And that's the thing that I find frustrating. The other thing that I've had to do, which I've never had to do up till now, is start to talk to teachers about the appropriate time of sitting for children. And that, okay, you've been told you've got to do an hour of literacy. For 5-year-olds, you cannot have an hour sitting doing literacy. You know, just look at how much time you're expecting children to be seated again, which is just, again, educational malpractice.
It is. And why can't you read the book and then have volunteers be a character and then have somebody else over here do something else? So the whole group is up and active and looking for costumes. And oh my God, it is just so frustrating.
It is, yeah.
But you know why? Like the students, and I love each and every one of them, the students that are in my classroom are victims of standardized testing. There is little critical thinking, little problem solving when I first get them. And, you know, so there'll be an assignment about a reading reflection, and you need to answer these questions. And they'll say, well, how long does it need to be? How many words does it need to be? How many? And I go, answer the questions. And, but how many words? Or does it need? And I'm like, I'm not going to tell you, figure it out, because they have been spoon fed everything, and there's no creativity. It just breaks my heart. And then, you know, after a while they get used to me, and so they go, she's not going to tell you how many words, you just have to figure it out. And I'm like,
this is a long stretch, but it's something I'm curious about, given what's happening in your country at the moment, and your, you know, the arrival of your leader once again on the political scene. Do you think that some of the downfall of some of your education system is now contributing to people putting?
Oh, absolutely. Because have we done anything but math and reading? No. Social studies has gone away. Nobody knows anything about social studies. Now, in the early learning places, we have fabulous standards on every, you know, it includes everything, approaches to learning all the way to social emotional development. And then, of course, the academic content areas. And they are mostly, I mean, I think Pennsylvania at least has done a fabulous job. They are mostly age appropriate for a typically developing child, but they also provide help and support for the classroom teacher to scaffold. And so, you know, you have your standard here, you say, this is what the learner should be doing, and here's how a teacher can support that practice. But, you know, so we're getting ready to have in one of my courses, they're getting ready to do an environment for infants and toddlers. So it's an infant toddler course. So the book is amazing. The textbook is amazing. Two of my grad professors wrote it. It's fabulous. They're very in tune with infants and toddlers and what infants and toddlers need. And we have talked about play. We have talked about age appropriate things. We've even done, I don't know if you know, I can't even tell you who did it, but there was a research study that was done, oh my God, decades ago. And it has an image of just centers in a classroom. And my teachers are like, well, how long should they stay? And I'm like, that is not the point of this activity.
Yeah.
And so you can put whatever age group you want on these handouts. So I start them at 18 months and go all the way through 4.5, even in an infant and toddler setting. And so it's a classroom, static classroom, just a picture of it. And they have to figure out by the age, and I do it every 6 months, they have to figure out by the age how many times children will move in that space in 7 minutes.
Wow.
It's amazing. Decades old. I could send it to you.
Yeah.
And so I have teachers do that. And you know what and this is after they have read this amazing book, how they've reflected on it. We've done temperaments and responsive care and getting in tune and including all children. And I can't even tell you the amount, but I can verbally tell you, but I can't do it in this assignment.
Yeah, because the assignment then has to have a grade and we have to pass or fail and we have to know what it is to pass. That sort of mentality, do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or it's what's done to them.
Yeah.
And what they're then doing unconsciously to children. And so, sometimes when so this is both an online class and a face-to-face class. And so it'll be, there's days I will walk in after grading the assignment from the week before. And I said, tell me why I'm not happy. They're like,
oh,
you're
boy.
not happy. I said, I'm not happy. Tell me why I'm not happy. And they're like, did you? So, and I said, I'll wait. And we would have explicitly done an active learning experience about what literacy should look like.
Yeah.
And all they give me are letters.
Mm.
And I mean, we've gone through the standards book. How many of those standards for, let's say, pre-K this time, how many for those standards for pre-K say anything about letters? Only one out of 35 standards. Only one, because they've investigated. I said, here's the standards book. This table's going to look at these pages. This table's going to look at these pages. This table's going to look at these pages. And then over the weekend, that was Thursday. Over the weekend, it's like, shoo.
Yeah. And we have that here too, the focus on when we talk about literacy, we should really just say decoding, reading, decoding. That's what we mean, not all of literacy, which is the rich area of learning. We're going to narrow it down into whether you can decode these symbols on this page and make sense of the words in front of you, and that's what we're going to call literacy. So we have to challenge that as well. So you're seeing that you've got that richness in the early years. What happens further up when you mentioned that things like social sciences and things disappear? I'm just coming back to why you've got Leader and Power now and people that have followed some of the
because people don't even know what democracy is, and they have been so discouraged with what they've been put through that we have adults who just follow the leader off the cliff like the lemmings. They can't think for themselves. They can't problem solve. They can't say, So you'll notice in the streets, I don't know if you saw the protests worldwide this last weekend. But in the streets or at the Tesla dealerships, lots of those people are older.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is also a fear of politicians because they don't like us being able to think for ourselves. That's why they want to destroy education. So it's and that has been around for a long time. Look what they're doing to the universities.
Yeah.
They're punishing them, sanctioning them, taking money away from them. And you know, so I feel like they're trying to put us back way before 1960, where women are pregnant, barefoot, and in the kitchen. And if you're not a white person, then you don't belong here. It's just awful. You know, I keep waiting for France to say we want our statue back because it.
There's been some memes about it. I've seen some memes online about it.
I bet you have, and they should be there. That's the even scariest part.
Yeah.
So you know, it's and you know, it's really interesting. We have an AI program like everybody else is bringing in artificial intelligence into the computing sort of discipline, right? And so I'm on I'm like one of the people on the steering committee, so we have to review anything that comes through and does anything with any new course or anything. And I mean, these are very bright, intelligent people, very bright, intelligent people, very bright.
Yeah.
And they're writing this course on AI. And I said, where's the ethics? Oh, well, they're going to get that in an entry-level course. I said, oh, no.
No, the ethics for this are much more complex, aren't they? Much more than entry level.
And so finally, you know, because I lost that battle. I mean, I fought for probably 20 minutes of the 55-minute meeting. And I was like, okay, so this is what I'm hearing. That being ethical and caring for our democracy does not fit this committee. Is that what I'm hearing? I mean, you know me, I have no, I say what I think. And nobody said a word.
Which is agreement.
You know, you
Yeah.
just don't tell me you're doing ethics in an entry-level course. You should be doing ethics in every course.
Yeah.
Right? What is now that we've learned this, what's the ethical issues that you might face? And so we do the same thing in early childhood. We talk about ethics from it. If there is one thing I actually agree with these days, is the NAEYC Code of Ethical Conduct. I don't agree with anything else, but that one I agree with.
Yeah.
And you know, the very first thing is do no harm. Hello.
Yeah. And sort of looping this background to play, to me, if we have a foundation in play, if our children get the opportunity to interact with other children, to meet other brains who might think differently from them, to meet people who behave differently from them, and not always what we like, you know, because we're not going to play with people that do the same things that we like. Over time, if we're introduced to that, we're in it, we're immersing ourselves with other people, then we will grow a connection around connecting, humanity, understanding, empathy, you know, all of those things that make us human, right? Those are the things that set us apart from things like AI, things like our, you know, the basics that we're talking about here that seem to be disappearing at the moment around care. This is part of, you know, why you and I do the job we do, right? Is to advocate for this broader view of humanity and connection and understanding about people and ultimately how that impacts the world.
Well, and just think about on the playground, when you were in primary grades on the playground, oh my goodness, it was and I grew up in South Texas, so my friends were Hispanic.
Mm.
I was the minority in
Yeah.
South Texas.
Mm.
And it was a rich, vibrant interactions. We didn't cluster all the white people over here and all the Hispanics over here and all the Asians over there. It was this beautiful quilt of different beliefs and cultures and practices that you were so curious about.
Yeah.
And
But
you know,
actually, you're inquisitive, aren't you? There's no judgment as kids. You just, how come you do that? Well, I do it like this, you know, and there's no, it's just wanting to know more. Yeah.
It's different.
Yeah.
We're friends, right? So it's like, you know, the things that you learn on the playground at recess, and ours was an hour, and the things that you learn are probably more important than the hour of literacy that they're having to do, or the hour of math. When, my God, we were doing jacks on the playground, we were doing math out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
We were hanging upside down by our knees.
Physics, lots of physics. Yeah. Yeah.
The physics.
Yeah.
We were, you know, running around and bumping people off the seesaw and jumping off the swings as high as we could go. And nobody told us that was too high. Nobody told us don't do that. It was risky play all the time.
Yeah.
And so those sorts of experiences give you that shared belief that everybody might be different, but that doesn't mean they're not your friends.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that you can, it's so interesting.
Yeah, it is. And that difference is not something to be scared of, you know, because I think that's what's driving a lot of the conflict at the moment, or the decisions around diversity and all that kind of thing. It's fear. It's fear of
But then, do they even look at how they created that? Why? You know, you might have people who can't put food on the table, stealing food so their children can eat.
Yeah.
Because you did this and this and this. What else do you expect them to do? Let their children starve?
Yeah.
You know, so it's this whole social breakdown of wanting to blame but not taking responsibility.
Yeah.
Not taking responsibility, and you're mad at teachers because of the test scores continue to go down. Well, do you know what you've done to create this problem? Sure. Pick me. I'll tell you.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
You've created the problem.
Yeah.
So you need to take responsibility and let's start changing it.
Yeah.
I don't see much hope in this term of our leadership.
No. No. And we're very much the same. We sort of feel like we're treading water. Sort of, let's hope.
Protecting what you can. Yeah, protecting what you can.
Yeah.
And then making sure people know that that's not what you want to get, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that's the so, I mean, you know, we had a strong economy, the dollar was doing great, we had wonderful relationships with other countries, and the damage that can happen in, it hadn't even been 3 months yet, because he wasn't in until January the
probably feels like years already, right?
It does. And you just go,
yeah.
So, yeah. So, you know, just please don't be sucked into people's lives. You know, it is, and you know, we knew on the campaign trail, well, that's a lie, and that's a lie, that's a lie, and that's a lie. But the other big piece I think that contributes to it is reality TV.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And I said that 20 years ago. I said, this should not be on TV.
No. And equally social media, which is a form of reality TV in a way, isn't it? You know, when you're looking at people's polished lives and, you know, curated content that is not reality, I think is a really scary thing. Look, I'm just conscious of the time, and I've got two things I want to do. The first one is that,
Okay.
Coming back to the idea of risky play, I've got a question from my previous guest.
Okay.
I hope that you make the connection to who this might be, but you won't be surprised when I do tell you who it is. But the question was, could you tell me let me make sure it's right, who is your favorite tree?
Oh, who was my favorite tree? It was a pecan tree.
Right, and why?
So in my yard, on this 5 acres, we had 6 pecan trees. And they were enormous, higher than the house. And the house was 2 stories. And so I climbed pecan trees all the time. And I would get I had my favorite. So there were 6. So the one that was in the front, closest to the front of the house, was the one that had the lowest limbs, that when I started, I could reach and climb really high. And I just remember one day out there, I don't know, I wasn't very old. I climbed up too high and I said, uh-oh. And I started looking around going, how am I going to get down? And nobody came and rescued me. I didn't start crying. I just said, okay, we got to figure this out. How are you going to do it? And so I was finally able to get down. So that was on a tree that I probably shouldn't have been on, right? It was not on the first tree. It was on the second tree that I decided I was going to try to climb higher. And so I went back to the first tree until I could climb really, really high and get myself down without panicking, but a pecan tree.
But isn't that interesting? You went back to the first tree for some reassurance.
Yeah.
Like
I went back because I was successful there.
Yeah.
And I think I did a little too much over here. So I'm going to go back. So until I can stay again.
Back to this tree
that's
after
my
you.
tree.
Yeah.
Right there. That very first one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, the tree was my favorite. I don't know who asked me that question. Was it Daniel?
Yes, well done. And he'll be delighted that you answered. And he'll be delighted you answered without hesitation. You didn't even look at me like it was an unusual question to ask. So that's wonderful.
Yeah, the country. Yeah. I can see it in my head. I can still see them on that line.
Yeah, I had a tree in our front garden, which was one that you couldn't really climb. It was, as you say, the branches were too high, and I remember the bark was really rough. But we had an amazing tire swing attached to it, and it was, my brother and I spent hours on the tire swing, and I remember it was just the place, and the ground was worn underneath, But I have a hate relationship with it because it was also the tree where my brother wound me up in this so tight that the rope broke. And I still get this feeling on your tailbone of hitting the ground. So I love the tree, but I also have that memory of it as well. So, bumps and scrapes.
But wasn't the tree's fault? That would be someone else's fault. And
he knew about it too, and he's still reminded of it many a time now. So that's fine. I do not blame the tree at all.
No,
it's just a wrong place, wrong time.
That just sounded like a Daniel question to me.
Yeah,
it's so funny.
Yeah, absolutely. So my last question then is, there's something that we're trying this year, and Daniel started it off for us, is what's the question that you would like to ask my next guest?
Okay. What the question I would like to ask your niece?
My next guest. There's my
your next guest. Got it. I'm with you now. I think I would like you to ask them how do we move forward in promoting play with children, all children, every child, right?
Yeah.
How do we move forward?
Right. Excellent question. Yeah. All
and
right.
I want to know that answer. So let me know.
Yeah. I will. I'm going to think about who's coming up that I'll be able to ask that question to. That's a great question. Look, Deb, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Sarah, it's been so much fun as always.
Always so much fun.
Yeah,
so for those people who are interested in learning more about Screen Free Week, where can they go more about that?
So you can go to screenfree.org, and you can also go to the IPAUSA.org website. And if any of you want to submit a proposal for the October conference, the proposals are due May 1st, and you can find them at IPAUSA.org. So, and I know it would be way early in the morning. Well, so 6:30 at night is what time for you?
I don't know. It's 8 in the morning now. So what's your time?
Okay, so it's 8 in the morning now. Yeah, so that might not be bad for you. People could do it. So on April 22nd, Stephanie Galloway, who wrote the most amazing book, Happily Ever Resilient, is all about fairy tales, and because we don't do fairy tales anymore. And so it's free to anyone who wants to join on, and I'll be sending another big invite with the link to sign up next week to the world. So if you're a member of IPA World anywhere, then you'll get the link, and it's free to you. And she has done the most amazing job of trying to reintroduce fairy tales into the early childhood classroom, because of course in the US we don't want children to be scared. And I'm like, that's not how they see fairy tales.
No, we did all right. Yeah.
Yeah. I know, crazy.
Scarred by fairy tales. Yeah.
I know. I know. I mean, mom read them to me all the time.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Oh, well, I'll look out for that, because yeah, I'm a big proponent of anything magical. I think is wonderful. So thanks, Deb. I will look forward to catching up with you again.
Thanks so much. This has been great. Take care, Sarah.
See ya. Bye.